you can see the uppermost fibers marked as dendrites. They are there to receive the information from other parts or other neurons basically, which lie in other parts of the body, right? And then that information travels to the cell body, where the nucleus is there. It is marked nucleus. It is present in the cell body. Basically, cell body is like any other cell which contain all the cell organelles and help in its functioning. After that, there is a long fiber called axon, which receives the signal from cell body and transmits the impulse further to the nerve ending. So basically, these are the functions. Dendrite receives signals, as I already explained. Then cell body, also known as soma, contains nucleus and other cellular components. Axon carries the information from the cell body, and axon terminal. At the end, there are axon terminals which finally transmit the signals to other neurons. There is one interesting fact that neurons are one-way channels of communication. They receive the information from dendrites and transmit it through axon. So it is a one-way channel. Okay. And also, human brain contains more than 100 billions of neurons. To explain further, there is one more diagram explaining the details of the diagram. There are a myelin sheath. As you can say, axon has a covering, a green colored or blue colored covering called a myelin sheath. And in between the gaps of myelin, there are nodes of Behaviour, right? So myelin sheath is basically composed of fatty material which provides insulation and also speeds up the signal conduction. The nerve impulse or the signal which travels throughout the axon get insulated, get protection by a myelin sheath, which further enhances the speed of signal conduction. And there is one more interesting fact, that if there is any damage to myelin sheath, then there is a disease called multiple sclerosis is caused, where a person faces jerky and uncoordinated movements. Then when I told you about rods of Behaviour, which are the gaps in myelin sheath, they actually recharge the signal as it travels along the axon. Then there is one more important component called glial cells. Glial cells is derived from a Greek word which means glue, to stick on. That's why the function of glial cells is to hold the neurons in place. Okay, so basically these are non-neuronal cells which provide nutrients, and the most important fact is production of myelin sheath is by glial cells only. It helps to form the blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier is basically what? It is a barrier to protect your brain from invading pathogens, right? Then glial cells has one more important function, that it removes the dead neurons and other pathogens from the surrounding of neuron. So, to know it further, there are several types of glial cells. Few of them are here, like oligodendrocyte, as you can see here. Basically, its function is to form a myelin sheath, but in case of only central nervous system, and which I am going to explain in later, the types of nervous system. And there is one more, Schwann cells. Its function is also to form myelin sheath, but in case of peripheral nervous system. Astrocytes, you can see they play a very important role as they maintain the chemical environment surrounding the neuron. Microglia are the immune cells of brain. Ependymal cell, the first picture you can see there, the ependymal cells are basically responsible for the production of cerebrospinal fluid, which helps in protecting the brain. Okay, cerebrospinal fluid. Anything left? Satellite cells are also helpful in regulating the chemical environment surrounding the neuron. Now, to know further, there is a synapse. Synapse is basically a gap or a junction between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron, through which the two neurons can actually communicate. So basically what is happening, as you can see there, neurotransmitters are released from a presynaptic vesicle. Neurotransmitters are what? They are basically the chemicals which are released by neurons that carry the information across the synapses. So the neuron from which information is being transferred is known as presynaptic cell, and the neuron to which information is being transferred is known as postsynaptic cell, right? So neurons are basically present in synaptic vesicles. They are the structures in axon terminals that contain various neurotransmitters. As you can see very clearly in the diagram, synaptic vesicle consists of neurotransmitters which are released in the synapse, and the postsynaptic neuron has certain receptors to bind those neurotransmitters, and the signal is further transferred. So you can see this diagram also to get a clear view. Neurotransmitters are being released from the axon terminal to the synaptic cleft. They bind to the receptors and of postsynaptic dendrite, and further the signal is transferred to other neurons. And those neurons which are not being utilized are taken aback by the presynaptic neuron. So basically now let us study about how the nerve impulse get transferred from one neuron to another, and also from within the neuron how it is transferred. So it has certain basic steps. So let us start the very first step, which is the resting potential or the membrane potential. As you can see in the diagram, the very first step is phase 1, where the membrane potential is minus 70 MV. That means the cell membrane has a negative charge inside, right? And outside it has positive charge. It is relative. That means inside of cell membrane is more negative as compared to the outside of membrane, and the value is minus 70 MV. So when a cell is at rest, this resting potential is maintained, and all the channels are basically gateway for the ions to cross the membrane. So all the channels are closed at this phase, right? Now the next phase is graded potential. Now what actually happens whenever a signal comes? Sodium ions which are outside the membrane, they tend to enter inside the membrane. So signals from external stimulus came, sodium channels open up, and they generated a weakened potential generally. Okay. This signal transfer a very short distance, but as sodium ions are entering the membrane, you remember earlier the membrane potential was minus 70 MV. Now because positive ions are being entered inside the membrane, the potential will decrease or increase. Tell me, the potential will decrease or increase? The potential rises. Like earlier it was 70, now it will be like minus 65 or minus 60 somewhere. Okay, so the next phase is the very important phase, action potential. Basically it is the depolarization phase. So basically what happens when there is a strong stimulus and a very strong signal, then more number of sodium ion will come inside the membrane. Okay, so the membrane potential will exceed a threshold potential. Threshold, you all understand, the basic criteria so that a boosting signal is generated. So there is a threshold potential at minus 55 MV. So as more sodium ions are getting in, the membrane potential rises further, and as the process goes on, the cell potential reaches plus 40 MV. That means complete depolarization of membrane occurs. Inside will become positive, outside will become negative for a certain period of time, which is a very brief period actually, but it happens. So basically this we actually call is what? Action potential generation. And generation of action potential is all or none response. What does it mean? All or none means whether it will happen completely, the signal the potential will be generated completely, or it will not generate at all. In contrast to the graded potential which we have discussed previously, in that case like few signals are generated but they are weak, so nothing much happened at all, like no strong signal is generated. But in case of action potential, there are no weak signals. Either it will generate completely with full power or it will not. Then the next phase is repolarization. In this phase, what is actually happening? Sodium ion channels from where the sodium entered in the previous case get inactivated. As you can see in the diagram also, sodium gate, when they allow sodium ions to enter the cell, they get inactivated very quickly. They allow entry of sodium ions for a very brief period of time. Then what is happening? Potassium ions, which are already present inside the membrane, they are released from voltage gated channels. Thus they help in restoring the membrane potential. As more number of potassium ions are released from the membrane, like from inside to outside, it helps in restoration of membrane potential. Right now, next phase is hyperpolarization, which we also call as a refractory phase. So what is basically happening is potassium ion channels remain open for a long time as compared to sodium channels. Potassium channels remain open for a long time. As a result, there is more release of potassium ions. So excess of potassium ions go out, and membrane potential decreases to less than minus 70 MV. Minus is missing in the slide. Please correct it. It is minus 70 MV. And in this phase, like the membrane potential goes even beyond that. Like it goes like minus 80, minus 85 or something like that. Okay, so this is the phase of hyperpolarization. But after some time, potassium channel closes and sodium potassium pump opens up, which helps in again sodium going outside and potassium coming inside. So this again helps in restoring the membrane potential, which was like minus 70. We have to come back to the normal base potential. So finally, the last phase is again back to membrane potential, the resting phase of membrane. Sodium potassium pump help in restoring the potential. Again minus 70 MV inside, and all the channels are closed all again. So this was how actually the nerve impulse is conducted within a neuron. This is within a neuron, how action potential is generated. We can explain this or understand this with the help of graph basically. So as you can also see in the graph, at minus 70 MV, which is the resting potential, when stimulus is given, if stimulus is weak, then there are certain fail initiations, as you can see there. But when their signals reaches a certain point, so that membrane potential reaches minus 55 MV, so at that point action potential is generated, that is depolarization occurs. During this phase, as we have already understood, sodium ion enters inside the membrane. Okay, then after reaching a peak point, next phase is repolarization, when potassium ions goes out to maintain the balance, to come back to the resting potential. But potassium channels remain open for a longer period of time, and there is another phase which is refractory period, or the hyperpolarization phase, where membrane potential goes even below minus 70 MV. And finally, with the help of sodium potassium pump, again the potential is restored to the resting phase. Okay, so this is the whole summarization of the process that we have already discussed. Any doubts from here? Have you all understood? Okay, shall we proceed? So the next is synaptic transmission of nerve impulse. That means transmission of nerve impulse from one neuron to another neuron. So here you can see the whole neuron. The very first step is synthesis of neurotransmitter and formation of vesicles. Then second, transport of neurotransmitter down the axon, which we have already discussed how it all occurred. Action potential travels down the axon, right? Then action potential causes calcium. This is an interesting fact. You should note it down, that action potential causes calcium to enter. Actually, calcium is responsible to evoke the release of neurotransmitter from the vesicles. When the vesicle senses the presence of calcium, they go to close to the membrane and fuses with it and release the neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft, in the synapse only. Then neurotransmitter binds to the receptor of dendrite of another neuron. Neurotransmitter can be exciting or inhibiting. Exciting means it activates, it generates the activating signal, or it generates the inhibiting signal, and depends on the signal given by neurotransmitter, the other neuron behaves accordingly. And then separation of neurotransmitter molecules from the receptor. Then when signals were generated, neurotransmitters get separated from the receptors. And finally, the neurotransmitters are taken back. There is reuptake of neurotransmitters to be recycled. So also vesicles without neurotransmitter transported back to the cell body. So this is how the nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another. Okay. There is also one important fact which is not actually mentioned in the slide, but I want to tell you that I told you about the nodes of Ranvier in the diagram, which I explained before. So basically, the action potential which we are talking about travels through those nodes of Ranvier only. In between there is a myelin sheath which is insulating. It doesn't allow any signal to pass. So these signals or action potentials pass from one node of brain V to another node of brain V. That's why we also call this process a saltatory conduction. Saltatory is like jumping from one point to another. So these signals basically jump from one point to another, and we also call them as saltatory conduction. Okay, so next is the types of neurons. There are basically three major types of neurons. The first one is bipolar neuron. Bipolar, from the name suggests, it has like two poles, one dendrite and other is axon. That's why it is known as bipolar. But as far as its function is considered, it helps in relaying the information. So it is also called an interneuron, which receives information through dendrites and passes it further through the terminal. Another neuron is unipolar neuron. That means it has only one pole. It also has dendrites and terminals. And it is also known as sensory neuron, as it helps in receiving information from our sense organs or sensory receptors and passing it further to our brain. There is one more name given to this type of neuron is pseudo-unipolar neuron, because as we can see in the diagram, it seems to be quite similar to the bipolar neuron. Even function wise it seems to be similar to bipolar neuron, but basically it has like one pole only. Its axon is being divided into two. In bipolar there is only one axon, but in unipolar axon has two branches, and one branch is acting as a dendrite and other branch is acting as a terminal. So we can also call it as like instead of unipolar, somewhere it is also mentioned as pseudopolar. The next one is multipolar neuron. Multipolar neuron is basically having many dendrite fibers, receiving information from number of neurons, number of other neurons residing in like at various parts of the body, transmitting the information through a single axon and then further transmitting information through the nerve terminals to several other neurons. That is why it is called multipolar, and it helps like this kind of neuron is found in your muscle cells called as motor neuron, which receives signals from like various areas of your brain and further passes information to the effector organ to act accordingly. Next we'll discuss about the roles of various neurotransmitters. The first one is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is excitatory in nature. That means it gives an activating signal for other neurons. It is found mostly in neuromuscular junction, stimulates muscle actions, also found in hippocampus. Hippocampus, we will discuss it further. Basically, it is a part of your brain which is involved in learning and memory. So, acetylcholine also has a role in learning and memory. When its amount is too little, when acetylcholine amount is too little, it is related to the diseases called dementia and Alzheimer's. And when the amount of acetylcholine rises, it gives chances to depression. Another neurotransmitter is dopamine, which is found in brain region called substantia nigra. It has role in movement, attention and learning, and when its amount lowers, it results in depression and even in Parkinson's disease. But when its amount rises in excess, it is also associated with the case of schizophrenia. Another is norepinephrine. It is found in autonomic nervous system and it has role in control and alertness, involved in wakefulness, and if it is present in too little amount, it is associated with depression. If it is present in excess, then it is associated with schizophrenia. Basically, norepinephrine is that flight or fight response connection. Okay, then another is GABA, which is GABA. Gaminobutyric acid. It has an inhibitory role. That means it passes an inhibitory signal to another neuron. It is found in brain and spinal cord. Receptor sites get affected by tranquilizers. It has role in eating and sleeping disorder, and if its amount lowers, it is also associated with anxiety disorder. That means this neurotransmitter is required in appropriate amount in our body to maintain our calm, right? So that we remain anxiety free. Another neurotransmitter is serotonin, which is found in lower part of the brain. It has both excitatory and inhibitory role depending on the brain area that it is found. It is associated with sleep, mood, and your appetite. It lowers in case of depression. Then endorphins are pain relief hormones. We also call them feel-good hormone. When we cut a finger, this hormone is very much functional at that time. Opium, heroin, morphine. When these substances are taken, then pain is not felt. Basically, they mimic the endorphin. Opiums are the substances or chemicals which mimic the endorphin and attach to it receptor site, so that it helps in the pain relief factor. So basically, when we exercise or we go for a morning walk, we generally feel good, and that is because of the release of endorphins at that time. Another neurotransmitter is glycine. It also has an inhibitory role. And there is one more substance called substance P. It has a role in detection of pain. So here there is a table summarizing the role of neurotransmitters. We have discussed almost all except one, that is glutamate at the end. Glutamate is a major excitatory neurotransmitter which is involved in memory. If it is oversupplied, it can overstimulate brains, producing migraines or seizures. Okay, that's why few people avoid certain food substances containing glutamate. So that's all about the role of neurotransmitters. So now we'll discuss about the major divisions of the nervous system. I guess basically there are two major divisions of nervous system. One is central nervous system, another is peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system consists of cranial and spinal nerves. Then peripheral nervous system can also be divided into two, which is sensory and the motor one. Sensory is basically the system which receives information from sense organs, and motor nervous system has two parts, which is somatic system and autonomic system. Somatic system is related with all the voluntary functions of your body. It is related to your skeletal muscles basically. And autonomic system is related to all the involuntary functions of your body, like smooth muscle functions, cardiac functions. No further, autonomic is further divided into parasympathetic system and sympathetic system. Sympathetic system is basically utilization of energy, like in the case of flight and fight response, sympathetic system of body is very much active, and parasympathetic system is the case of rest and digest, yani ki it helps in the restoration of energy back. So basically our central nervous system and peripheral nervous system is fully connected. Signals from CNS, which is central nervous system, goes to PNS, like PNS is all the nerves of our body, cranial and spinal nerves, and further it gives signals to our somatic muscles or our involuntary muscles to act accordingly. And the sensory branch of it receives the signal through the peripheral nervous system and finally send it to the brain for processing, further processing. From here we can develop our understanding about the reflex action. Reflex action you all must have studied before in your school, I guess. Basically, reflex action is the action in response to a stimuli which occur involuntarily, like without our even permission. It just happens automatically. So whenever a stimulus is given, a receptor like our skin receives the signal, then activation of a sensory neuron. Sensory neuron is the neuron which receives the signals from the receptor, sensory receptor. Then it passes the signal to the central nervous system. As you can see in the step 3, it passes the information to central nervous system for processing, and then finally the information is passed to the motor neuron. But all this information is being transferred with the help of a relay neuron, which is an interneuron, which helps in transporting the information. So finally information passes to motor neuron with the help of relay neuron, and the motor neuron sends that signal to your effector muscle cell. Okay, and then finally you behave accordingly. That, for example, if you touch a hot pan, you just keep your hand back very fast, like in milliseconds. So what is that? That is reflex action. Okay, to know in more detail, like peripheral nervous system is made up of all the nerves and neurons that are not contained in brain and spinal cord. It carries nerve impulses from sensory receptors inward to the central nervous system, and it also carries nerve impulses outward from central nervous system for the movement of muscles. PNS allow central nervous system to control muscles and glands of the body. So as we have already discussed, it has two main branches, somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic is the one like we have discussed in reflex action also, which have efferent neuron. Efferent is basically the sensory neuron from sense organ, and efferent neurons are basically the motor neuron which travels the signal from CNS to muscles. So spinal nerves are also playing the same role, and cranial nerves are also playing the same role. But in case of autonomic nervous system, we have one sympathetic branch, and which has the spinal nerves from thoracic and lumbar region of our spine and sympathetic ganglia. It has all that flight and fight response. But parasympathetic branch has cranial nerves, spinal nerves from sacral region, and parasympathetic ganglia. To understand it in detail, the autonomic nervous, so as you can see in the diagram, there are two branches, parasympathetic and sympathetic, as it is already mentioned or labeled there. In case of sympathetic, there are certain body functions occurring, like your eye pupil is being dilated, and it inhibits salivation, stimulate sweating, speed up the heartbeat, stimulate glucose release, constrict the blood vessels, inhibit the digestive system, stimulate the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are the basic flight and fight response hormones. So what is actually happening is, in case of sympathetic system, like for example, a dog is after you, so obviously you'll try to run away from that dog. So at that moment, epinephrine is being released, and the action you are following is the flight mode, like you are trying to run away from that place. Or by chance, if you try to face that dog, then also same hormone is being released and you are being prepared for the fight mode. So this is all about utilization of energy. But contrastingly, in the parasympathetic mode, pupils are being constricted. That means tears can be generated. Then it stimulates salivation, slow down the heartbeat, stimulate the digestive system, constrict the bladders, and also stimulate the sexual arousal. So basically parasympathetic is the rest and digest mode. When we eat and we just want to sleep and want to digest, at that time parasympathetic mode is very much active. You can see the difference there. In case of parasympathetic, our digestive system is very much active, but in case of sympathetic, all our energy is being invested in our flight and fight activities. So at that time, our digestive system is not in active mode, it is inhibited. That is the major difference. So here you can also see the neurons playing the role in parasympathetic and sympathetic system. Preganglionic neuron is the neuron in which soma is the cell body. I've already told you. Soma is usually in the brainstem or sacral toward the bottom of spinal cord. Neurotransmitter released from the preganglionic synapse, and the neurotransmitter is, in this case, is acetylcholine. Then postganglionic neuron. I'm talking about the parasympathetic side right now. Then postganglionic neuron, soma is usually in the ganglion near the target organ, and neurotransmitter released from postganglionic synapse, acetylcholine or nitric oxide. So that was pre, and next one is post. Then information in the form of neurotransmitter finally reaches the target organ and rest and digest response is activated. But in case of sympathetic, soma is in spice of preganglionic neuron, and in case of postganglionic neuron, like cell body is in sympathetic ganglion next to the spinal cord, neurotransmitter is released. In this case it is norepinephrine, and which further reaches the target organ and activate your flight and fight response. So this is all about your autonomic nervous. Now the next is somatic nervous system, which we have already discussed in the case of reflex action. Somatic nervous system carry messages from senses to central nervous system and carry the central nervous and carry them back from central nervous system to the skeletal muscles. So as we have already discussed, sensory pathway is comprised of sensory nerves which carry information from sensory receptors to CNS, which is also known as sensory or afferent neurons. And motor pathway consists of the motor neurons, basically, that carry messages to the voluntary muscles, also called efferent neurons from CN. Now, central nervous system. The central nervous system is basically composed of your brain and spinal cord. Both brain and spinal cord are composed of neurons and glial cells, control the life-sustaining functions of the body as well as the thought, emotions and behavior. It guides movement and even registers sensation throughout the body. So basically all your brain and spinal cord comprises your central nervous system. Okay, now how the human brain is being divided further. The major divisions, as you can see in the table, are forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, then we have ventricle. Forebrain consists of lateral and third ventricle. Midbrain consists of cerebral aqueduct, and hindbrain consists of fourth ventricle. Ventricle is what? Ventricle is actually the space, the hollow space within your brain where cerebrospinal fluid is found. So it has like 4 categories. I'll explain you further in further slides. Then further subdivision is telencephalon. These divisions are basically the neural development phase. Like when the neural tube of your system was being developed, then these phases came. So first one was telencephalon and diencephalon, which further formed your forebrain. Mesencephalon formed your midbrain, and metencephalon and myelencephalon formed your hindbrain. Now to know it in further detail, forebrain consists of cerebral cortex, basal ganglia, limbic system, thalamus and hypothalamus. Midbrain has tectum and tegmentum, and hindbrain has cerebellum, pons and medulla oblongata. So this is the ventricle. As I have already explained you, ventricle is one of the hollow spaces within the brain filled with cerebrospinal. As you can see in the diagram, there is lateral ventricle, third ventricle, massa intermedia, cerebral aqueduct is also part of ventricle, and fourth ventricle. There is one fact that hydrocephalus is basically a disease which is caused due to the blocked flow of CSF. CSF is cerebrospinal fluid. So when the flow of this fluid is blocked, then these ventricles get enlarged. Why? Because of the accumulation of this fluid in those areas. In ventricles, CSF get accumulated when its flow is blocked, so which can result in subsequent brain damage. So that area of brain actually like swells up with that fluid, and this condition is known as hydro. Now these are the diagrams for the neural development of brain. So the names which we have already discussed: telencephalon, diencephalon, mesencephalon, metencephalon and myelencephalon. So as you can see in the diagram, the telencephalon region and diencephalon region is resulting in the formation of cerebral cortex, basal ganglia, hypothalamus and thalamus, and these are the major parts of forebrain. Like this will further form your forebrain. Mesencephalon form the tectum and tegmentum, which is the part of your midbrain. So this area is further going to form your midbrain. Metencephalon and myelencephalon forming the cerebellum, pons and medulla, which is the main part of your hindbrain. So this is all about your like neural development of your brain, stages of your brain development. Finally, this is the structure of your brain. The outer covering of brain is called cerebral cortex. Then you have your forebrain, which is the main region of the brain. It consists of cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus, and then the red portion in between is your midbrain, and in the lower brain region there is hindbrain, which consists of pons, medulla oblongata and cerebellum. So but midbrain and hindbrain, they both comprises to form the brain stem. Okay, so this is all about our human brain. So this is all about the human brain. We'll discuss its function further. Okay, so let's have a 5 minutes break right here. We'll discuss it further. Okay.